Hello and welcome back to Cairns Conversations. Today we're sitting down to talk to Katherine, the co-founder of Save Women's Sport Australasia, to discuss where we're heading in regards to the slow and, in my view, menacing advance of the gender fluid movement into our day-to-day lives. Hello Katherine and welcome to our show.
Hello Alan, thanks for having me on.
A pleasure. Now Katherine, I'm sure you're aware that 99% of the people out there would be against this ridiculous assumption that a man can get up one morning and decide that they want to now be recognised as a female and be accorded all the rights and privileges of womanhood. So why do we as a society, in your view, tolerate this rubbish?
Well, I think that this has come in off the back of the LGBT movement. So the T has attached itself to the gay rights movement in the middle of last decade and has positioned itself as the next civil rights frontier. Now, because of the history with the gay rights movement, particularly in Australia with the rather toxic same-sex marriage debate, people just accepted it as that without asking questions. However, what is termed trans rights is actually male demands. So this is men who, rightly, as you said, some of whom wake up one day, decide that they identify as a woman, whatever that means, and then instantly granted access to women's spaces, rights, sports and services. Now, this is all being done by stealth. There are certain lobby groups within our community, some of whom are funded with substantial sums of money from our government to push these policies into our institutions, our government departments, our corporations, our education system, tertiary, primary and secondary. And thus far, they have basically brooked absolutely no debate and no criticism of their very extreme worldview. And anyone who has been brave enough to stick their head above the parapet has often been shot down. They have had their characters smeared, their livelihoods attacked, their children threatened. I myself have had rape and death threats that I've had to report to the police, merely for standing up and stating the truth, which is humans cannot change sex, and when we allow men access spaces to where women and children are vulnerable, that breaks basic safeguarding principles.
Now, Katherine, you started a petition that was presented to the Federal Parliament. How was that received and where is it at the moment?
So the petition was received by the Federal Parliament. Now, fortunately, we have a champion in Senator Claire Chandler, a young Liberal senator from down in Tasmania. And she is in the process of putting up a private member's bill to save women's sports. So she is seeking to have a bill that clarifies that it is not unlawful to exclude men and boys from the female sports competition under the Federal Sex Discrimination Act.
Right. Now, has it got the support of major parties? Because I'm guessing the Greens and the left wing, the ALP, wouldn't be too keen on supporting that, would they?
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, the Greens are very much on board with this queer theory and gender identity. Just this week, they tried to erase woman 23 times from a piece of legislation that concerned women and replace it with person. So they are definitely not on board. Labor is very much being captured by identity politics, not just here in Australia, but also in other jurisdictions around the world. The Left Party, like in the UK, and the Democrats in America are very much swimming in the trans Kool-Aid. However, on the Conservative side, Liberals, other right-wing parties are definitely supporting it. But I think more broadly, whether, Labor and Greens are pushing this ideology or not, when you get out there and you speak to the ordinary people, the mums and dads, the ordinary families in Australian suburbs, they don't agree with this, particularly when it comes to sport. Wherever there's been polling done in similar jurisdictions, UK, Ireland, Canada, the US, well over two-thirds of people do not support the inclusion of men and boys in women's sports. It's very clear.
I'm surprised it's only two-thirds. I would have thought, three-quarters minimum.
I think in Australia, I'm anticipating that in Australia it might be a bit higher, but irrespective of what the actual number is, it's a clear majority. And I think that the people who are still against it maybe don't quite understand what that means. I mean, we are starting to see some very recent examples of men competing in women's sports. For instance, we had Laurel Hubbard at the Olympics in the women's weightlifting. He is a middle-aged, overweight, mediocre male who is competing with the world's most elite female.
Didn't he win the sports thing of the year in New Zealand recently?
Yes, he did. He won the, hosted by Otago University, Sportswoman of the Year in New Zealand. I mean, what a joke.
Yeah,
and this year, just this week at the University of Pennsylvania, there is a boy who has been competing as a male who has suddenly come out as female. He was a rather mediocre male swimmer at best, and now he's breaking the records, the national records for women's college swimming in the United States. Now, it's an absolute outrage, and it means that for future generations of girls, when they look at that record that has been set by a male, it is going to sit there, fossilised, for years, because there is absolutely no way that women can beat those records.
Impossible. Now, Katherine, I know that it's men doing this, but didn't it sort of start with this women pushed it?
Look,
to their own detriment, I might add.
Look, I don't think this is necessarily, with the people who are pushing it, a men versus woman argument. Definitely women and girls are bearing the brunt. Having said that, my biggest champions in this fight, the men who support me in my personal life, they are my champions. I could not fight this without their practical and emotional support. I get letters from men all over the world, fathers, partners, grandfathers who are concerned about the women that they love, about their daughters and their wives. I think men, just as much as women, are very much against this. And there absolutely are women pushing this. Kate Jenkins, Sex Discrimination Commissioner at the AHRC, has been pushing this in relation to sport. She spearheaded the changes to sports policy here in Australia. So there are absolutely women on board with betraying their sex.
It's going to be a train wreck, as you know. Now, this is Cairns Conversation, and we're chatting to Katherine Dees about transgender acceptance in sports. Now, Katherine, a lot of our listeners might have heard about the male netball team that won a grand final in Brisbane, playing in a female competition recently. Was that team just trying to prove how ridiculous this movement has become, or do you think this might actually become the norm from here on in?
Well, look, that netball competition, I mean, the purpose of netball originally was because basketball wasn't ladylike enough. So, of course, the women just went off and did their own thing, and they've been massively successful. Now, obviously, netball want to grow their player base, and rightly so, but they have absolutely gone about it the wrong way. They should not have allowed a boys' team to play in the women's competition. Now, my understanding is there's 80,000 men and boys who play netball in Australia, which is great. So I don't buy the argument that they couldn't find boys to play against in a boys' competition. I also think that they were playing a game of willful pretend in ignoring the fact that there are biological differences between men and women. If you are a male-born person, even at the age of 7, 8 and 9, we have evidence to show that the boys outperform the girls, even pre-puberty. But then obviously when we hit puberty, the testosterone ramps up. It is a magical wonder drug, and it turns you guys into human beings that are bigger, faster and stronger than women. It is not transphobic or is not bigoted to say that. It is reality. And for Netball Australia to pretend that those differences don't exist, and then if you pit boys against girls, the boys will win. Like, I have no doubt those girls who are the champions have probably been playing since primary school. And then you have this group of boys who probably picked up a netball 6 months ago who beat them free and clear. Now, there's also the option of playing mixed sex. Why didn't the boys go into it? If they were that desperate to play, why didn't they maybe play in mixed sex where you had 3 boys, 3 girls on each team and made it fair?
Beggars belief.
I know. It's extraordinary. And the fact that Netball Australia is just, they've got men's, they've got mixed, they've got women's. They should not have let this boys' team play.
Have they responded at all to, well, I think it's an outrage, but has there been any pushback, I suppose, against this?
Oh, there's huge pushback within the community.
Within the netball community, Katherine?
Yeah, and on social media. All the commentary was basically against it. They were patting themselves on the back about being inclusive. And Katherine Clark, who I believe was the CEO, has now sort of pushed this policy, and now she's moved on to another sport. I believe she's working in the Paralympics now. So she's sort of thrown this bomb in there and just walked off. Now, there was a Netball Australia at around the same time they were allowing the boys to play. They also signed up to the policies that are being pushed by Pride in Sport. Now, this is a heavily taxpayer-funded group that runs under the ACON umbrella, which is used to be the AIDS Council of New South Wales Trust, and they push gender identity ideology. They're the ones pushing it through their Pride and Diversity programs, Pride in Sport, Pride in Health and Wellbeing, into all aspects of Australian life. So, but with their Pride in Sport franchise, they are systematically working their way through every single sporting code at taxpayer expense. So they're being funded to do this. They're being funded to lobby these groups. And then these groups are then paying them for the privilege of signing up to this program, where they are erasing the category of sex in sport. Sex in sport no longer exists. It is now gender identity.
I can't believe we're going down this path. It's just too crazy for words. Now, Katherine, what can, inverted commas, what can normal people do when they're confronted by this sort of this movement in their local sporting environment? What would you suggest what approach would they take?
Okay, so as I mentioned before, Claire Chandler is pushing a bill to protect girls' sports. So if you could support Claire Chandler, she is running that campaign, that would be great. If people can write to their MPs, I cannot express how important it is for people to let their MPs know what they think. Even just a short email, even a phone call to say, I want you to support Claire's bill, is very valuable. To just say, I do not support the inclusion of men and women's sports. They need to know what the people think. And if you are at the sports organisational level, you might be being misinformed that it is unlawful to exclude a person on the basis of their gender identity. But in the same legislation that they're relying on to push that idea, it also says that it's not unlawful to exclude on the basis of sex. So if people are involved in their sports organisations, they can say, no, I'm sorry, we don't want these policies that will allow men and boys to compete in the women's category. Let's keep it for the girls. Let's protect our daughters.
You mentioned legislation there. Wouldn't the sporting clubs and officialdom have like a duty of care to the girls and women?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there is a lot of evidence out there to show. World Rugby did a big review of all the evidence, and they determined that there is an conservatively estimated increased risk of serious injury to women and girls, 20 to 30%, if they play against a male-bodied person. So it also raises questions around, liability, risk management. And as we know, many of these sports organisations are run by volunteers. Everyone's busy. They don't have time to be across all of this. But if you're allowing men and boys to play in collision and contact sports with your daughters, with the girls and the women, there is an increased risk of injury. So I think sporting clubs probably need to consider that when they think about implementing these policies. This might
be the final straw in the volunteers' handbag there, because once one of the volunteers gets sued, that'll be the end of that sport in the local community. I'm sure of that.
Oh, I know. And do we really need to see, a young woman, injured or have a catastrophic injury or even dead because they've allowed a boy to compete in her collision or contact sport? Just
to tick boxes. Yes, it's just amazing. Katherine, I really appreciate your time to come and talk on the program about this. So that's Katherine Deves, the co-founder of Save Women's Sport Australasia, and it's been a pleasure talking to you, Katherine.
Thanks so much, Aaron. I really appreciate your time.